Thank you for your interest in recognizing and supporting survivors of human trafficking. This training has been created through a collaboration between SCORE Lawrence, the Willow Domestic Violence Center, and the Sexual Trauma and Abuse Care Center.
This discussion will include sensitive topics such as sexual abuse, physical violence, and exploitation. Please feel free to take a break or do whatever you need to take care of yourself. Also, if you need, you may call either of our 24/7 hotlines if you need more support. You can see the hotlines listed on this slide. And if this training brings up something personal for you, we want you to take advantage of that support and know that you're not alone. The World Cup is anticipated to bring approximately 650,000 people to the Kansas City metro area, including Lawrence, from May to July of 2026. Lawrence has also been chosen as a base camp. This means that this will be the home base for that team to practice and reside during the entirety of the tournament. Along with the team will be support staff, family, friends, and fans. Human rights scandals have marred World Cup tournaments for years. FIFA has required all host cities to develop action plans to protect human rights for the 2026 games in North America. The United States has not hosted the World Cup since 1994, so this is fairly uncharted territory, and we want to be prepared as possible as a community. A trafficking survivor in Houston shared that her traffickers absolutely targeted large-scale events such as the Super Bowl and Final Four tournaments, and that the communities and states that are chosen as sites have to be prepared for this possibility and influx. There is also an increased risk for vulnerable members of our own community to be lured into labor or sex trafficking with the increase of short-term jobs and visitors. The Willow, along with the Sexual Trauma and Abuse Care Center here in Lawrence, are honored to share what we already do with regards to education and prevention work in the community and being able to reach out to more members. Our hope is that this increased awareness and discussion of this topic will help to prevent trafficking and streamline support for survivors during this once-in-a-lifetime event.
We can never underestimate the power of our words on those who are being exploited and their willingness to reach out for help. We should adopt their preferred terms that focus on respect, empowerment, and validating strengths, avoiding words like prostitute, victim, etc. Also use person-first language to avoid stigmatizing them. People may choose sex work due to a combination of financial and lifestyle factors, including poverty, a lack of other job opportunities, or the desire for higher earnings. The legality of these activities varies widely, from being completely illegal to legally regulated or decriminalized, depending upon the jurisdiction. Additionally, a person may exchange sex or sexual activity or things they need or want, such as food, housing, hormones, drugs, gifts, or other resources. Survival sex is a term used by many nonprofit organizations and researchers to describe trading of sex for survival needs. High levels of stigma and criminalization contribute to the risk sex workers face. Stigma and criminalization create significant barriers to accessing support for sex workers by making them afraid to seek help due to fear of legal repercussions, judgmental treatment, and violence. The sex industry is a broad term for commercial trade in sexual services and goods, including activities like prostitution, pornography, stripping, and erotic dancing. The myth of choice says that nearly all prostituted women have been coerced into prostitution against their will, either directly or by circumstances, which include addiction, poverty, and an unstable or abusive home life, lack of education, and/or opportunity.
Now that we've talked about the history of human trafficking, let's start to understand what exactly it is and how it is perpetuated. The definition of human trafficking is the act of recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining a person for commercial sex acts or labor. Please note that anyone under the age of 18 engaging in commercial sex industry is considered to be a victim of human trafficking. And again, think about this in the context of not just sex trafficking, but overall human trafficking. These are different types of human trafficking. We tend to only think about sex trafficking, but labor trafficking is just as prevalent. Here are the definitions broken down a bit further. Sex trafficking, the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act in which the commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such act has not attained 18 years of age. On the other hand, labor trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining a person for labor or services, again through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bond, or slavery. So we can see there is a clear, distinct difference between sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Human trafficking is a hidden crime, meaning a crime that happens in the black market or behind closed doors because it is an illicit trade. Labor trafficking can be a little bit more in your face. So on the right side of that diagram, you can see things like landscaping, hospitality work, constructions, the industries such as restaurants and food services, recreational services, even healthcare, right? So those folks that are out and then being exploited for their labor, potentially at a reduced rate. So these can be a little bit more in your face and able to identify as opposed to sex trafficking. In addition, people who have been experienced conditions of trafficking often do not come forward because of a variety of factors. As such, it is extremely difficult to determine how many trafficking victims there are in the world or even in the United States. It is important to be cautious when using statistics related to the prevalence of trafficking because there is so little methodology that is sound to require data to answer that question.
When we are talking about human trafficking, we need to broaden our mind past what we have seen in the movies. There is an assumption that people that are traffickers are always going to look like bad guys. They are always going to be driving a creepy white van, and that they are strangers to those that are being trafficked. The reality is, we know that traffickers can be anybody. Human trafficking is a profit-driven industry where the demand is for sex or cheap labor. Traffickers are good at their business and know how to target vulnerabilities to meet their demand. And if you think about what makes somebody good at business, you understand the supply and the demand of your industry. Labor traffickers are often working as subcontractors who provide labor for large corporations at a cheap cost, leaving the larger corporation with no liability. Sex traffickers are often someone who knows the victim, friend, a family member, intimate partner, church leader, and also someone they met online. According to the Polaris Project, 42% of identified victims were brought into trafficking by a family member, and 39% were brought by an intimate partner or a marriage proposal. The reason that it is important to have this knowledge is to help educate our youth, our vulnerable community members, and understanding that trafficking is not fitting the narrative of what we have seen in the movies. Here we see some possible warning signs of a trafficker. It's important to note that the presence of some of these behaviors does not automatically imply that that person is a trafficker. However, it's something to be aware of in our own lives and as we're working to educate vulnerable people and youth that are around us. Some potential warning signs are somebody who is controlling, someone who has a history of violence, somebody who is significantly older than the person who is being targeted, somebody who may be pressuring activities that are illegal, pushing sexual boundaries, trying to break down what's comfortable for that person. Another possibility of something to look into is somebody who is pushy or demanding for sex, somebody who is very vague about what they do for work, and somebody who showers someone with expensive gifts, such as trips or valuable objects. Traffickers are ever evolving, and as our lives have gone more and more online, so has trafficking and recruitment. Targeting youth and others online has become increasingly common tactic. Traffickers will look for vulnerable young people who are receptive to their advances. According to data from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, there has been a 97.5% increase in reports of online enticement in 2020 versus 2019. Common places where people have been recruited are social media sites, gaming websites, dating websites, dark web, services such as OnlyFans and Craigslist, and through pre-existing relationships.
Understand why it's so hard for people to get out of that situation. A predator often becomes a trafficker or works for one. Predators often use grooming to build a relationship, posing as romantic partners, friends, or employers to lure victims into a trafficking situation. Traffickers are experts at finding those moments when people are vulnerable, of working the angles, of manipulating reality and leveraging fears. The process is called grooming. It is methodical, intentional, and it works. Indeed, it is the most common way that people, adults and children, wind up in sexual trafficking situations. Sex trafficking rarely begins with a violent abduction or with a stranger involved at all. It begins with someone the victim knows and usually loves or trusts. While every situation is different, The overall grooming process usually involves the following steps. First, targeting. Traffickers identify vulnerable individuals who may have unmet emotional needs or physical needs, such as loneliness, a history of trauma, low self-esteem, or economic stress. This often occurs online via social media or gaming sites, or in person at places like malls or shelters. 2. Gaining trust and information. The trafficker develops a false sense of security and intimacy with the victims, often by pretending to have shared interests, offering gifts, attention, or seemingly romantic relationships. This is sometimes referred as the honeymoon stage. They gather information that can later be used for manipulation. 3. Meeting needs. The trafficker positions themselves as the solution to the victim's problems by providing the support or items they lack. For example, a place to stay, money, or love, and a sense of belonging. This creates dependency, making the victim feel indebted to them. The next stages of grooming include isolation. The perpetrator works to distance the victim from their existing support systems, such as family and friends. This makes the victim more reliant solely on the trafficker and less likely to seek outside help or contradicting opinions. Then there's abuse and exploitation. This relationship shifts from a seemingly loving or supportive one to one involving abuse, force, or coercion. This can include physical, sexual, emotional, or financial abuse. The trafficker might introduce drugs or alcohol, use blackmail or compromising images, or create a false debt that the victim must work off. Maintaining control is the objective. Traffickers use various tactics to the victim to keep them trapped, including threats of violence against them or their family, gaslighting, destroying the victim's self-esteem, or controlling their finances or identification documents.
Now we are going to look over some myths and some facts about human trafficking. And if you find yourself that you've believed some of the myths, don't feel bad. We are just starting to have these in-depth conversations about human trafficking, even though it's something that really truly has been around forever. It's hard to imagine the kind of lack of regard for human suffering one would have to become a trafficker. So it becomes hard for us to imagine that this is something that is happening in our own community. Much of what we know about trafficking has been sensationalized and comes from movies and television shows. But with recent cases making their way to the headlines, we are learning more and more about trafficking and what it really is and what it really isn't. The reason that we discuss myths and facts is because we need to know what we are looking for. If we only believe the myths, we are missing many, many possible victims and also not deepening our understanding of this issue. One of the myths we're going to explore is that only women and girls can be victims and survivors of human trafficking. The reality is that men and boys are also victimized by sex traffickers. LGBTQ plus boys and young men are particularly vulnerable to trafficking. Another myth is that people in active trafficking situations are going to always want help getting out and be desperate to get out. As we'll discuss later, fear, isolation, guilt, shame, misplaced loyalty, and traffickers being expert manipulators are the many factors that may keep somebody from seeking help or even identifying as a victim. We also only think about human trafficking at times as something that happens to non-national U.S. citizens, so that it's something that only happens to foreign nationals. The reality is that the majority of sex trafficking survivors in the U.S. are predominantly United States citizens. The final myth we'll explore is that if the trafficked person consented to be in their initial situation, then it can't really be considered human trafficking because they knew better. In reality, even initial consent to a commercial sex act or a labor setting such as taking a job, if there are acts of force, fraud, or coercion, it is then considered human trafficking, regardless of what the original intent was or if the person is getting paid. The action means purpose model is a tool to determine whether a situation fits the federal definition of human trafficking. The action is the thing the trafficker does to the trafficking victim using the means or the method the trafficker uses to compel a person into the purpose or the type of exploitation. Human trafficking occurs when a perpetrator, often referred to as a trafficker, any of these listed actions, and then employs the means of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of compelling the victim to provide commercial sex acts, labor, or services. Examining force, fraud, and coercion, we can see that force includes both physical violence, threats of physical violence, and attempts to control through these threats. Fraud includes false promises of work, pay, or opportunities, as well as fraudulently convincing somebody that they are in a relationship, that they are genuinely somebody that cares about that person, and that there is some sort of significant connection. Coercion includes manipulation, threats, or abuse of power.
As we discussed earlier, traffickers care about one thing: making profit. And like any good business person, they understand the supply and demand of their industry. Trafficking is very common in group homes, juvenile detention centers, and jails. Traffickers know that individuals at these locations are experiencing hardship, and they can play those challenges by offering financial or emotional support to gain their trust. Very common to have peer-to-peer recruitment at group homes. And as we can note on the vulnerabilities slide here, 63% of survivors say lack of safe housing is the greatest barrier to leaving trafficking situations. LGBTQ youth are 5 times more likely to be trafficked than their heterosexual peers, and 1 in 7 runaway youth become sex trafficking victims. These are the vulnerabilities that have been understood as patterns when analyzing survivor demographics. Important to note, someone could have all of these and never be trafficked. Someone could have none of them and still be trafficked, but these are the trends that have been identified. Having a disability, people with disabilities are up to 5 times more likely to experience domestic and sexual violence. 81% of women and 75% of men trafficked for sex report past abuse in childhood or adolescence. And foreign nationals account for 94% of forced labor cases. Immigrants are especially vulnerable to labor trafficking due to immigration threats. We can see here that the conditions that lead to people being vulnerable do not happen in a vacuum. There are individual, family, community, and society risk factors that contribute to people being at risk of many kinds of exploitation. We know that some survivors of human trafficking may be forced to engage in criminal activities during their exploitation, and in some cases may be trafficked for the purpose of criminal exploitation. Criminalization increases sex workers' vulnerability to violence and harassment, and the fear of self-incrimination prevents them from reporting these crimes to the police. Knowing these factors helps us target prevention efforts.
Hotels are a crucial piece of the infrastructure necessary to facilitate sex trafficking and in-call and out-call escort services. Hotels and motels may also be used for commercial sex acts and other sex trafficking business models, where solicitation may be initiated elsewhere like nearby streets, bars, strip clubs, cantinas, or truck stops. Most survivors have indicated that they did not receive any assistance, concern, or identification from hotel staff during their trafficking experience. This may be due to a lack of training on human trafficking recognition and reporting protocols for hotel staff. For many survivors, hotels are sometimes their safest option for short-term emergency shelter when escaping their trafficking situation, creating an opportunity for hotels to step up and donate hotel points for safe housing. Those of us who respond to the home environments are uniquely positioned to observe physical clues, especially in moments of crisis when the environment hasn't been manipulated. There is such an overlap between substance use and trauma, so anytime we see signs of substance abuse, our curiosity should be piqued. Also, keep an eye out for things that don't match or don't make sense, such as a lack of personal items in the room or bathroom, having very expensive items in a cheap setting, and a disclaimer that just seeing the indicators does not automatically mean there is human trafficking. However, it is an opportunity to slow down and pay attention to other cues. So the unique role of hotel staff and hospitality workers is that they have access inside guest rooms, which allows for observing warning signs. More than 60% of sex trafficking victims said that they were forced to work in hotels or motels. 46% of criminal sex trafficking cases prosecuted by the federal government included allegations that commercial sex had taken place at a hotel. Also, hotel staff and hospitality work can discreetly provide resources and information. Some red flags to look for in a hotel setting: if the person is transient or unsure of their location, they have excess amount of cash or expensive items, if they're inconsistent and vague when describing and recounting events, the presence or fear of another person, if they don't have appropriate clothing for the weather, if they're asking staff or other guests for money or food, if they have multiple cell phones and hotel key cards, if they do not have their own ID or passport, if they don't have any personal items, if they come across as fearful, angry, or rude, if they're hesitant to go to the hospital or to speak with law enforcement. Additional red flags in hotel settings are if there are lots of alcohol bottles, drug paraphernalia, and large amounts of sexual paraphernalia, frequent or consecutive guests to the room, checking in for only a few hours, if they always keep a do not disturb sign on the door, if they're requesting towels but not allowing housekeeping to enter, if they pay with cash or preloaded credit cards, if they leave the room infrequently or not at all or at odd hours of the day, if there are cameras or recording devices, if there are expensive items that don't match the standard, a lack of personal items in the room, if there are multiple teenagers alone in the room. For restaurants and bars, look out for individuals loitering and soliciting bar or restaurant customers. If an individual is asking staff or patrons for food or money, individuals waiting at a table or bar who are repeatedly picked up by someone or several people, individuals taking cash or receipts left on the tables.
A possible sign that minors are being trafficked are similar to what we just stated, as well as being a runaway, being homeless, having a history of abuse, being coached, being with somebody who they appear fearful of, and again, having large amounts of cash. Here you may notice that instead of using the term child pornography, we are using the preferred term of child sexual abuse materials. The reason for this is because the words child pornography imply that there was consent on the part of the child, and that is not possible. We do not want youth to feel that they are part of that or that they are responsible for that production. So this is the preferred term that is used.
Some of the health and physical indicators you can look out for are matching tattoos, bruises consistent with abuse or workplace accidents with minimal explanation, malnutrition or fatigue, signs of drug use, IV and otherwise, bruises, marks, and signs of physical abuse, an overbearing, controlling partner or family member. If they express being in debt or owing someone something, they may not know exactly where they are or how long they have been there or what the day or date is, and if they appear to be living at their work site. It is important to have best practices, to have clear policies and procedures around suspected human trafficking cases, including an official reporting protocol, so that all staff feel comfortable and prepared. Some best practices include make frequent training a priority. Training hotel staff on human trafficking warning signs shouldn't be a one-off. Data shows that the more hotel employees undergo trafficking activity training, the more robust a hotel's anti-trafficking policy will be. Track the internet for any advertisements from sexual services sites that mention your hotel. Lock all doors at night, except the main entrance, to ensure all hotel traffic flows through it. That makes it easier for management and staff to notice suspicious activity. Observe and document warning signs to report to law enforcement or the human trafficking hotline. If someone is in immediate danger, call 911. Do not instigate conflict between the suspected trafficker and survivor. Do not feel the need to rescue or save. This can cause more harm to the survivor and you. And have resources to local survivor-based agencies available for everyone and know their referral processes.
Now we will go over the options of who you can call to relay your concerns or your observations. If you feel that someone is in a life-threatening situation or at risk of imminent harm, if you are witnessing a trafficking crime in progress, if a potential victim is at a location and is likely to be moved very shortly, and if you need immediate physical rescue or protection, then you should call 911 at that moment. Now, if the situation is not an emergency situation, you can also refer that to the non-emergency law enforcement number of your jurisdiction.
Are you a mandated reporter? Under Kansas law, mandated reporters, including healthcare professionals, teachers, social workers, and counselors, are legally required to report any suspicion of child abuse or neglect to the Department of Children and Families or law enforcement immediately. Reports must be made based on reason to suspect harm, not proof, and should include details on the child, incident, and alleged perpetrator. If you are not a mandated reporter but observe something concerning happening to a minor under the age of 18, you should still call the DCF hotline. That number is 1-800-922-5330, and it is a 24-hour hotline.
Additionally, if you have tips of a non-emergent nature, suspicions, ways to seek support, there's also the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and that number is provided here of 1-888-373. 7888. This hotline is a non-governmental organization and offers a confidential way to explore options before involving authorities. Also, the National Human Trafficking Hotline is also able to gather tips from the entire nation and may be helpful to construct patterns of trafficking that may be happening in different jurisdictions and different regions.
The Willow Domestic Violence Center builds safer communities through shelter, services, and support for survivors of domestic violence and human trafficking. The Willow serves survivors of domestic violence and human trafficking in Douglas, Jefferson, and Franklin counties. In addition, we serve survivors of human trafficking in Leavenworth, Osage, Johnson, Miami, Atchison, Nemaha, Brown, Wyandotte, and Donovan counties. Program services include a 24/7 crisis hotline, emergency shelter, court advocacy, support services, rural advocacy services, human trafficking program, foster care transition support program, youth prevention and education, and community presentations and workshops. All services are free and confidential and open to anyone experiencing domestic violence or human trafficking. For safety reasons, we ask that clients call our hotline themselves to enroll in our services. It is the port of entry for all of our services except for our presentations and community workshops. Our hotline advocates have access to a language line, allowing them to communicate with people in any language. Our human trafficking services are provided by specific advocates, as the needs are often quite different than traditional domestic violence services. To learn more about the Willow, please visit our website at www.willowdvcenter.org.
The Sexual Trauma and Abuse Care Center is a nonprofit organization that provides people of all genders and ages in Douglas, Jefferson, and Franklin counties with client-centered counseling, crisis response, advocacy, prevention, and education by ensuring services are free, confidential, and accessible.
A special thank you to the Children's Advocacy Center of Douglas County. Their mission is to ensure that children and families affected by child abuse receive a compassionate, community-based intervention through a multidisciplinary team approach to prevent, identify, investigate, prosecute, and treat child abuse. Some of their services include family advocacy, forensic interviews, trauma therapy, and therapy specific to problematic sexual behavior. The following slide includes a video with more information about children advocacy centers and how they help our communities.
A Children's Advocacy Center, or CAC, provides support to victims of child abuse. Without a CAC, an abused child may have to tell their story over and over again in settings that may be scary or where kids may think that they're in trouble. Then, families have to search around for the services their children need, all on their own. But in a CAC, a child tells their story to a trained interviewer who makes the process gentle on the child and finds the facts which are crucial to the child's case. Then, a community of professionals in medicine, law enforcement and child protective services, prosecution, victim advocacy, and other heroes work through the CAC to decide the best way to help the child. And CACs provide science-backed mental health care that heals kids from trauma and helps them reclaim their futures. This community of caring professionals rallies around the child so children have everything they need, all in one place, at the CAC. To find your local CAC or to sign up for updates, visit nationalchildren'salliance.org.
Here's a concise list of resources, both national and local, for somebody who might be experiencing human trafficking. The National Human Trafficking Hotline is 1-888-373-7888. The Willow Domestic Violence Center is 785-843-3333. The Sexual Trauma and Abuse Care Center is 785-843-8985. You can either give this information to someone directly or have it hanging up in your business so people can see it and call on their own. Large events increase the risk of human trafficking, but informed communities reduce it. Thank you for taking the time to learn how to recognize and respond to human trafficking ahead of the FIFA World Cup 2026. If you're feeling impacted, take a moment to care for yourself before moving on. Awareness matters, and so does your well-being. For questions about this training or prevention efforts, please contact Adrienne Nunez, Director of Communications at the Willow Domestic Violence Center, at communications@willowdvcenter.org. If someone is in immediate danger, please call 911 or contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline. On behalf of the Willow Domestic Violence Center and the Sexual Trauma and Abuse Care Center, thank you again for caring about your community and participating in this training. Your facilitators from the Willow are Heather Muth, the Prevention Education Coordinator, and Adrienne Nunez, Director of Communications. Your facilitators from the Sexual Trauma and Abuse Care Center are Christina Gentry, Associate Director, and Zach Newby, Education Specialist.